So, what I'm going to talk about now is not about Russia, but about American foreign policy debates, especially as they relate to our political process. I was ambassador for 2 years. I served 3 years before that at the White House, at the National Security Council, and I teach at Stanford, trying to explain these debates. I travel a lot. I spent a month, on our campus at Beida. Fantastic experience. If anybody wants to do more on that, get a hold of me, McFaul at stanford.edu. We got lots of ideas. One of the hardest things to do as ambassador or professor or as a visiting scholar at Beida is to explain foreign policy to Americans or people living in China or Russia because it's confusing. So in the short amount of time I have today, I'm going to give you a crash course. And if there's one thing you remember, right? The bluff, as they call it at the Pentagon, bottom line up front. A really good phrase, by the way, that more academics should use. What is my bluff, my bottom line up front, is that the main cleavages in debating about American foreign policy in Washington are within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party and do not fit on a left-right divide or Republican-Democratic divide. In other words, there's no such thing as a Republican foreign policy, and likewise, there's no such thing as a Democratic foreign policy. So if you want to get an A, you can just remember that and we're done, right? So that's the only thing I want you to remember. But if you're still not tired, let me get into these debates just a little bit. And I'm just going to mention two. There are more, but these are the two biggest ones, especially over time and in our current moment. And I am going to get to Trump at the end of my lecture, because he screws up everything I'm about to tell you. But the first big debate that goes obviously back to the creation of the United States is between the isolationists and the engagement folks. The second one, which really becomes more part of our traditions and our debates, really comes to the fore during the Cold War and today. That's the debate between the realists and the so-called liberals, otherwise known, if you're in the Republican Party, as neocons. Now, part of the reason it's so confusing is that we use such confusing terms, right? A lot of this comes from academia. Liberalism in this debate is the same thing as the neocons. And I'm going to explain that, but someday we should get better terms to understand these folks. Just to get ahead of myself, Ronald Reagan is the most important liberal institutionist of the 20th century. I'm saying that deliberately to try to confuse you. Hopefully I can explain it by the end of my talk. All right, isolationists. I'm assuming you know these debates. Isolationists, going again back to the beginning of the Republic, say that alliances and foreign relations tend to entangle us into things we don't want to do. That was most certainly part of the debate when I was at the White House at the National Security Council talking about Libya. Therefore, we should just limit them and not have many alliances, not have relations with outsiders. Second, free trade is a bad thing for isolationists because it's not fair. Third, intervention, whether it's economic or especially military intervention abroad, rarely works, either to defeat our enemies and most certainly to promote regime change or democracy. That's what isolationists believes. And fourth, international institutions constrain American power, and therefore we should avoid them and not be active in them. Engagement advocates, they think exactly the opposite on all these dimensions. Alliances enhance security, that's their view. Free trade benefits the US economy, so we should engage in more of those kinds of institutions and treaties. Intervention is a necessary part of being a global leader. And fourth, joining international institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, is not a constraint on American power. It helps us to leverage our power by being a leadership in these multilateral institutions. Now, 100 years ago, this was a big debate. On the eve of World War II, it was also a big debate. For most of the Cold War, it faded entirely. Because for most of the Cold War, it was not considered an option, Democrat or Republican, to be isolated from the outside world. And instead, the main cleavage, again, within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party was this one: realism versus liberalism. Interest versus values, to oversimplify. Now, this debate actually goes way back again. I think it really gets going during the French Revolution. Because remember, the monarchy, anti-illiberal, most certainly not a democratic state, was our ally in our fight for our independence during the American Revolution, right? A monarchy. And then some of these crazy people over in France said, hey, we kind of like the ideas that the Americans are talking about. We want to be democratic too. They were rebelling against our closest ally in the world at that time. And it became a big debate. Should we help them or be with those that helped us during the American Revolution? The debate only meant something after we became a superpower in the world. And here's the main tenets of this debate. Realists believe and argue that the system is anarchic. There's no rules, there's no laws. It's just a jungle out there. States are the main actors in this jungle. Not businesses, not NGOs, not international institutions, but states, nation states, China, the United States, Russia. They're the main actors. Everybody else doesn't matter. Third, and this is maybe the most important part of their argument, how states are organized internally does not affect the way they behave in this jungle. Doesn't matter if they're communist, capitalist, democratic, monarchy, theocracy, it doesn't matter. All that matters is their power. Big argument over how to measure power, of course, but that's all that matters. And in particular, the balance of power in the international system between the great powers. The realists, they don't care about little powers, right? They don't care about little countries. They care about China. They don't care about the little powers. And it's the balance of power in the international system that drives all the drama, especially the rise of some states and the decline of other states. And therefore, the policy recommendation from the realists today, because we are the most powerful nation in the world, and we still are by almost all dimensions, we should preserve the status quo, accept the world as it is, and try to preserve it the way it is now. Liberals, Wilsonian liberals, because Woodrow Wilson was really the first big champion of this, otherwise known as neocons in the Republican Party, with one big distinction. Because neocons don't believe in international institutions. They reject them just like the isolationists. But they have a different theory. One, they submit that anarchy can be reduced through international law, through international institutions. It need not be a jungle out there. Two, states are the most important actors. They accept that, but they also accept that other actors in the international system matter. Facebook, Google, Twitter, Stanford University, big businesses and international institutions, groups like the United Nations, TPP, AIIB, all of these things are part of what influences foreign policy, not just the individual states. Third, again, biggest divide between realists and liberals. They believe that the kind of regime internally affects the way that states behave externally. And their biggest hypothesis, by the way, proven by social science research, which rarely happens in foreign policy debates, is that democracies don't fight each other. I challenge you right now, not now, but during the break. Tell me two democracies that have fought a war, ever. There's an answer. There's a couple of answers depending on how you define democracy, but this is one of their central hypotheses about the nature of the international system. Most certainly all of American enemies have been non-democracies, and therefore their policy recommendation is not to accept the status quo as it is, but to think of the world as it should be, including the promotion of democracy. That, to me, has been the main debate in international politics within the United States, within Washington, over the last 70 years. And here's just a brief illustration of where Democrat and Republican presidents might fall in this. For those that don't have your glasses on, I brought some photos too. Now, having clarified all that, I need to muddy the waters before I end, because it's too simple. I actually had this debate with then Senator Obama, not on Air Force One, but Obama One, when I was working on the campaign. And he listened to me. I had just written a book about this. He said, hey, Mike, The world's not that simple. Your theories, your Stanford theories, it's very dismissive. Your Stanford theories, that's not the way the real world works. And he's right about that, because on many different dimensions, this debate is not as simple as I just described it. Between presidents, it changes. Between presidents and the parliament and civil society, this debate happens. Within presidential administrations, and I witnessed this working at the White House and the US Embassy, there are people that have different beliefs despite whatever the president says, within individuals, and most importantly, within individual leaders. In fact, within the brain of Barack Obama, there's a right side that is a realist, and there's a left side, or maybe it should be the other way around, that's the liberal. I mean, here, this is the president speaking here. I actually wrote this speech. He read it. That's not exactly true. He edited it quite firmly. Yeah, it was an interaction. Let me just put it that way. These are very liberal ideas. And again, another speech. These are very liberal ideas, despite the fact that if you were asking the president, as somebody just did in an interview last week, he would say, I tend to be towards the realist side. And that's why it's so darn hard to explain American foreign policy abroad, because it doesn't fit neatly into these paradigms. And then there's this guy. All I would say, because I've gone on longer than I should, is that Trump, in many ways, looks pretty obvious to me. He's an isolationist, so he's brought that debate back, roaring back in a scary way to me, in a very scary way. We thought this debate was over 70 years ago. He's brought it back. He's also a realist. He doesn't believe in regime change. He doesn't believe in democracy promotion. But he's also a nationalist. And that's the part that scares me the most. That is something new. You didn't see a slide on nationalism versus non-nationalists or what would metropolitan, what is even the opposite of nationalism? Internationalism. And that is different. Trump has radically changed this foreign policy debate. But if I had more time, because I don't want to leave you on a bad note, there's some good news. People say things during the campaign. They don't do exactly that when they become president. There's a professional class in the US government. Day one, January 21st, 2009, when I showed up to work at the White House, I was surrounded by people that worked for George W. Bush for 8 years. It was crazy. It's like, hey, we won. And we believed in change you believe in. Remember that? That's what we ran on. And suddenly I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that don't believe in change. They believe in American national interests as defined in a different way. There's also Congress, civil society, the media, and there are other countries, including China, that will help to check, no matter who is president, that it doesn't go in such a dramatic way.